established rancher. Instead, his 26-year-old grandson met her at the station, revealing his grandfather was gone, then desperately proposed marriage himself. Whistle pierced through the Montana afternoon as Margaret pressed her gloved hand against the window. Dust swirled across the small platform of Copper Ridge Station, and her heart hammered beneath her modest gray traveling dress. Somewhere out there, waiting among the handful of figures on the platform, was Bartholomew Hutchins, the rancher whose letters had brought her across 3 states to become his wife. For 6 months, they had corresponded. His letters had been thoughtful, practical, and kind. He wrote of his sprawling cattle ranch, of the mountains that turned purple at sunset, of his need for a partner to share the responsibilities, and the beauty of his land. He mentioned his age, 52, and his decades of hard work building something meaningful. Margaret at 34 and long resigned to spinsterhood after caring for her ailing parents until their passing, had found unexpected hope in his words. The train lurched to a stop. Margaret gathered her carpet bag and the small trunk that contained everything she owned. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her bonnet. This was truly happening. She was about to meet the man who would become her husband in a week's time. Stepping onto the platform, she scanned the waiting faces. An elderly couple embracing a young woman. A merchant directing workers loading crates. 2 weathered cowboys who barely glanced her way. But no distinguished older gentleman stepping forward to greet her. Then she saw him. A young man, perhaps 25 at most, with sunlight and brown hair curling slightly beneath his worn hat. His face was tanned and handsome in a way that made her breath catch unexpectedly. He stood apart from the others, nervous energy evident in how he shifted his weight from boot to boot, his blue eyes searching each departing passenger. When his gaze landed on her, those eyes widened with recognition, and he started forward, then stopped himself, then started again with visible awkwardness. Miss Margaret Thornton. His voice was younger than the voice she had imagined reading those letters, warm, but uncertain. She stared at him, confusion washing over her. Yes, I'm Margaret Thornton. I'm looking for Mr. Bartholomew Hutchins. Something flickered across his face, pain and fear, and something else she couldn't name. He removed his hat, revealing more of that earnest, too, young face. Miss Thornton, I'm Joseph Hutchins. I've come to collect you. Could we speak somewhere more private? Her carpet bag suddenly felt heavy. Where is Mr. Hutchins? Where is Bartholomew? Joseph's throat worked as he swallowed hard. Please, ma'am, let me get your trunk loaded, and we can talk on the drive to the ranch. I promise I'll explain everything. The sensible part of Margaret, the part that had survived loss and loneliness and learned caution, told her to get right back on that train. But something in this young man's eyes, a deep sadness that reminded her of herself, made her nod slowly. He loaded her trunk into a simple buckboard wagon with practiced ease, then helped her onto the seat with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his obvious distress. As they pulled away from the station, heading toward mountains that did indeed look purple in the distance, Margaret waited. Finally, as the town faded behind them and open rangeland stretched ahead, Joseph spoke. My grandfather passed away 2 months ago, Miss Thornton, peacefully, in his sleep. His heart just gave out one night. The words came out rough, scraped raw with grief still fresh. Bartholomew Hutchins was my grandfather. Margaret felt the news settle into her chest. Like a stone, the man whose words had given her hope, whose future had become her future in her mind, was gone. She had traveled all this way to find a ghost. I'm very sorry for your loss, she managed. though her own disappointment threatened to choke her. "But I don't understand. Why did you meet me? Why didn't you send word?" Joseph kept his eyes on the road ahead, but she saw his jaw tighten. "Because I'm a coward, Miss Thornton. Because I read my grandfather's letters to you after he died, and I read your letters to him, and I couldn't bring myself to write to you that the future you were counting on was gone. I kept thinking I'd do it the next day, and the next day, and then you were already on the train, and I couldn't." The honesty of it caught her off guard. In her experience, most men hid behind excuses or anger when caught in wrongdoing. This raw confession was unexpected. "So what was your plan?" she asked, and she couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "I arrive, discover the truth, and then what? I have barely enough money to survive a week, let alone purchase a ticket back east." "I know." He finally looked at her, and the misery in his eyes was genuine. "I know I've made a terrible mess of this, but I'm asking if you might consider staying anyway." She nearly laughed at the absurdity. "Staying? As what?" "As my wife." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their directness. The wagon rolled on, wheels creaking, and somewhere a meadowlark sang, oblivious to the chaos those 3 words had created. "You cannot be serious," Margaret said. "I am completely serious." Joseph pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "I know this isn't what you expected. I know you came here to marry a man of property and stability, someone established. I'm just a young cowboy trying to hold on to my grandfather's ranch. And I'm probably going to fail at it, because I don't know half of what he knew. But the ranch needs a woman's hand. I need help, and you need a home. Maybe that's enough to start with." "Start with?" Margaret shook her head in disbelief. "Marriage isn't something you start with, barely enough. I may be a spinster desperate enough to answer a mail-order advertisement, but I'm not foolish enough to bind myself to a stranger on such flimsy reasoning. You were willing to bind yourself to my grandfather, and he was a stranger too. Your grandfather was established, mature. His letters showed wisdom and character. Those letters showed you who I am too," Joseph said quietly. "I wrote half of them." Margaret stared at him. "What?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "Last year, grandfather's hands started shaking badly. Arthritis. Writing became painful for him. So he'd dictate his letters, and I'd write them down. But sometimes he'd just tell me the general idea of what he wanted to say, and I'd compose the actual words. The letters about the sunset on the mountains, the philosophy about partnership in marriage, the quotes from books, those were mine. His ideas, but my words." The revelation shifted something in Margaret's understanding. She had connected with those letters, with the sensitivity and thoughtfulness in them. To learn they came partly from this young man sitting beside her, this stranger who suddenly seemed less strange, unsettled her. "That doesn't change the fundamental problem," she said, but her voice had less certainty now. "You're barely more than a boy. I'm 26, Miss Thornton. I've been working this ranch since I was 12, when my parents died and grandfather took me in. I may not have his years, but I have his teaching. And I have something else." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I have the same loneliness you do. I read it in your letters. Recognized it because I feel it too. This ranch is beautiful, but it's empty. I eat meals in silence, work until I'm too exhausted to think, and wake up to do it all again. Grandfather understood that. That's why he sought a partner. I need that too, maybe even more than he did." Margaret looked away from him toward those distant mountains. Loneliness. Yes, he had named the thing that had driven her to answer Bartholomew's advertisement. The crushing weight of solitude, of eating alone, and sleeping alone, and moving through days that all blurred together in their emptiness. She had hoped marriage, even a practical one, might ease that ache. If I stayed, she said slowly, not committing, but not refusing either. What exactly would you expect? A partnership, like grandfather offered you. You'd have your own room until you decided otherwise. We'd share the work of the ranch, the decisions, the profits, if there are any. I'd expect honesty, effort, and patience while we figure out if we can build something together. That's all. And if we can't, if this proves to be a terrible mistake. Joseph picked up the reins again, but didn't signal the horses forward yet. Then we'll figure that out too. But, Miss Thornton, I think you came all this way because you're brave enough to try something difficult in hopes of something better. I'm asking you to stay brave just a little longer. Against all logic, Margaret found herself considering it. Perhaps it was exhaustion from the journey, or the fact that she truly had nowhere else to go. Perhaps it was the memory of those letters, the words that had touched something in her heart. Or perhaps it was simply that this young man's loneliness called to her own. Take me to the ranch, she said finally. Let me see it. Then I'll give you my answer. Relief washed over Joseph's features as he urged the horses forward. You rode in silence for a while, the landscape growing more beautiful with each passing mile. Rolling grassland gave way to gentle hills, and the mountains grew closer, their peaks still snow-capped even in summer. When they crested a final rise, Joseph stopped the wagon once more. There, he said simply. Below them, nestled in a valley, where a creek sparkled in the sunlight, lay the ranch. It was more modest than Margaret had imagined, but something about it caught at her heart. A sturdy log house with a wide porch, a red barn that needed fresh paint, corrals where horses grazed peacefully, and beyond it all, cattle dotting the hillsides. Cottonwood trees lined the creek, their leaves shimmering silver and green. It's beautiful, she whispered. It is, Joseph agreed. But it's also struggling. Cattle prices are down. I lost 3 hands this spring to bigger ranches that could pay better wages. And the bank is breathing down my neck about the loan grandfather took to expand the herd. I won't lie to you about the challenges, but I will promise you this. I'll work myself to the bone to make this place thrive. And if you're beside me, we'll share equally in whatever comes. Margaret studied his profile as he looked down at his land. There was determination there, and pride, and yes, fear too. But there was also something else, something that reminded her of those letters that had moved her. Hope, your grandfather, she said. Tell me about him. Joseph smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face. He was the best man I ever knew. Tough as leather, but with a soft heart he tried to hide. He taught me that land is worth nothing if you have no one to share it with. After my grandmother died, he was alone for 15 years before he finally admitted he wanted a partner again. He was so nervous writing that first letter to you. Made more. Rewrite it 4 times? Why me? Margaret asked. There must have been other responses. There were, but grandfather said, your letter was different. You didn't make promises about being a perfect wife, or list your accomplishments, like you were applying for employment. You just told the truth about your life, your losses, and your hope that maybe there was still something good ahead. He said that kind of honesty was rare and precious. Tears pricked Margaret's eyes unexpectedly. She had agonized over that letter, finally deciding that if she was going to uproot her entire life, it should at least be for someone who knew the real her. "I wish I could have met him," she said softly. "He would have liked you very much." Joseph turned to her. "I know I've handled this all wrong, Miss Thornton. I should have been honest from the start. But I'm being honest now. I need you. The ranch needs you. And maybe, if you give this a chance, you might find you need us too." The sun was lowering toward the mountains, painting everything in golden light. Margaret thought about the empty boarding house room that awaited her back east, the seamstress job that barely paid enough for rent, the endless sameness of days that stretched ahead like a gray road to nowhere. Then she looked at this valley, this struggling ranch, this too young cowboy with old eyes and an honest heart. "I'll need my own room," she said. Joseph's eyes widened. Of course, and a say in all ranch decisions, not just the household ones. "Absolutely, and time. Time to know you, before we make this marriage real, in more than name. All the time you need." Margaret took a deep breath. "Then I'll stay. Not because I'm desperate, though heaven knows I am, and not because I have nowhere else to go, though that's also true. But because those letters your grandfather dictated and you wrote showed me someone worth knowing. I'd like to discover if that person truly exists." The smile that broke across Joseph's face was like sunrise. "He does, Miss Thornton. I promise you he does. And I'd like to discover who you truly are too, beyond your letters." As they drove down to the ranch house, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Not the anxious anticipation that had plagued her journey, but something warmer. Possibility. A gray-haired woman emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "So she came," the woman called. "I told you she would, Joseph. Miss Thornton, this is Ruth Campbell. She manages the house and keeps me from complete disaster." Ruth's weathered face crinkled into a smile. "Welcome, dear. I have supper ready and your room prepared. Joseph, get her trunk inside and then leave us be. This poor girl needs food and rest, not your nervous chatter." Over the next weeks, Margaret discovered a life she had never imagined. She woke before dawn to help Ruth prepare breakfast for the ranch hands Joseph had managed to keep. She learned to manage the chickens, tend the garden, and keep accounts. In the evenings, she and Joseph would sit on the porch, and slowly, carefully, they began to truly know each other. He told her about losing his parents to fever, about his grandfather's patient teaching, about his dreams for the ranch. She shared her own losses, her years of caretaking, her secret love of poetry that she'd never had anyone to discuss. 1 month became 2. The bank agreed to extend the loan when Margaret's careful accounting revealed expenses that could be cut. A deal Joseph negotiated brought better prices for their cattle. Slowly, the ranch began to stabilize, and slowly, something else began to grow. Margaret found herself watching for Joseph's return each evening. His smile became the best a part of her day. His hand brushing hers as they reviewed accounts made her heart quicken. 3 months after her arrival, as they sat watching the sunset paint those mountains purple and gold, Joseph took her hand deliberately, not by accident. "Margaret," he said, using her first name for the first time. "I need to tell you something." Her heart raced. "Yes. When you stepped off that train, I was terrified. I thought you'd hate me for the deception, thought you'd leave immediately. But you stayed, and these months with you have been the best of my life. You've saved this ranch with your intelligence and hard work. But more than that, you've made it a home. You've made me happier than I knew I could be. Joseph, she whispered, I know we agreed to time, and I'll wait as long as you need. But I want you to know, I don't need more time to know my heart. I love you, Margaret. Not as a practical partner, though you're wonderful at that, but as a woman I want to share every sunrise and sunset with for the rest of my life. Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks. I came here expecting an old rancher who needed help, but I found a young cowboy who needed me and who I needed too. I thought the letters that moved me came from decades of wisdom, but they came from you. From your heart. And I've fallen in love with that heart, Joseph, completely. He cupped her face gently, his eyes asking permission. She nodded, and he kissed her with a tenderness that made her believe in new beginnings. The wedding was small, held in the valley with the mountains as witness, as Margaret became Mrs. Hutchins in truth. She thought about expectations and surprises, about how the best things often come in unexpected packages. She had expected an old rancher, but a young cowboy had arrived at the station, and he had given her something far better than what she expected. A love worth waiting for, a partnership built on honesty, and a future bright with promise. The ranch thrived, so did they, and every sunset, they sat together on that porch, grateful for a train that brought them together, and brave enough to trust in unexpected love.